Okay. My name is Riley Wheelwright-Grammer. I'm going to be presenting on the Latino American community today. And just to get started, um, just briefly discuss some of the experiences that I've had with this particular culture from 2018 until 2020. I lived in Ecuador, um, volunteering as a religious missionary. I was able to live there and experience the culture of Ecuador and the people and the food. Um, and I gained great love for the people down there. And more recently, in 2022, last year in the fall, I had the opportunity to live in Guanajuato, Mexico, for a semester, and I did some volunteer English teaching while I was there, and I had the chance to travel around Mexico and experience the culture and food in central Mexico, and we were able to go to a few other destinations as well. And I was able to see the differences, the vast differences between these two Latin American countries. To begin the presentation here, just with some the socio-demographic of the Latinos in the U.S. I found this graphic that kind of it's a little bit outdated, but it does kind of show some important things about this this very large group in the United States. I just wanted to update some of the statistics. There's now 63.7 million Latino Americans living in the United States. And that's almost 20% of the population. It's estimated that by the year 2050, Latin Americans will make up over 25% of the United States population because of the immense growth that they're having in this population in the United States. Kind of just goes along with my bullet point there, along with Asian Americans. Latin Americans are the fastest growing ethnic group in the United States. 43 million Latinos are native to the United States, meaning that they were born here. There's often the false notion that Latinos are somehow legal aliens that have moved from other countries, Mexico or Central America. But that is a false notion because most Latin Americans living here were actually born here in the United States. And then 9 million foreign-born Latinos have lived in the United States since before the year 2000. So they've already been here for almost 25 years. Last slide kind of led into some of the stereotypes that there are about the Latino people in the United States. There's often the false notion that all of the Latinos here in the United States come from Mexico, and that every brown person must like tacos and chihuahuas or spicy food. But that's just untrue. Almost 50% of the Latinos in the United States come from places other than Mexico, such as I think the next largest group is from Puerto Rico, and then a vast amount of other countries from South America, Central America, and some from Spain as well. Another stereotype that is often brought up within the media is that Latino immigrants are stealing the jobs of hardworking people in the United States. But the problem with that stereotype is that large percentages of Latino immigrants they don't actually work in jobs that most white people work in. Most often, they are pushed to the fringes of society, and they're doing the hard field labor or hospitality labor that um, most white people will never do in their lives living here in the United States. And the agricultural business and the field working people, they're a very necessary part of the United States agriculture sector. So the thought that um, we should be keeping immigrants out of the United States is somewhat unbacked because we need those people and we need people to be working in the fields because that's very necessary to the American economy. Another stereotype is that Latin Americans always follow traditional gender roles. While it might be true that a lot of Latino American countries do generally follow traditional gender roles, that it's just simply untrue to assume that that all of them are follow those roles. And last one I'm going to cover is that Latin Americans are unwilling to learn English. This harmful stereotype leads to Latino students in United States schools being discriminated against because the assumption is that, oh, these kids, they just don't want to learn English or they're unwilling. And that's problematic because they're then discriminated against and the teaching staff don't have faith that the students are going to be able to progress. And when there's the loss of faith in the students, that just leads to decreased performance. Many Latino students in Utah and other states are also mandated to attend English second language classes, which at first glance may seem like a necessary thing. But a lot of the times these classes end up harming the students more than helping because it pulls the Latino students out of class so that they're behind in their regular classes. And then it just kind of leads to them being left behind. And then there's all the stereotypes about Latinos just having somehow less intelligence, or because of they have an accent, somehow they are less able to learn. So there's all sorts of harmful stereotypes in that way. Another thing I wanted to cover is the term Hispanics. This was a term that was actually coined in the United States by the U.S. Census Bureau after a Chicano group. Chicano is another term for people from Mexico who have lived in the United States for quite some time. A Chicano group called NCLR lobbied for more representation of Latin people in the government. They were wanting more social services for their population, but they didn't have a way to show how much of the population came from Latin American countries. So the group, they wanted some way in government to show the percentage of these people. And that's when the term was coined, Hispanic. And this is somewhat problematic because U.S. culture nowadays generally understands people of Latin American origin or descent to be part of a unified ethnicity. That's problematic because to assume that someone from Mexico versus Colombia versus Brazil versus Bolivia or Chile, to assume that people from all of these very different cultures and countries and histories are all the same type of person, that's a very ethnocentric view that we in the United States oftentimes have of this very diverse, very culturally diverse group of people coming from Central America and Southern America. So we need to be careful with the terms that we use to refer to these people. The most important thing is to ask, but some terms that are common could be Latino American, Latino or Latina, Latinx, Chicano, or just the term representing the country their family comes from, such as Ecuadorian, El Salvadorian, Puerto Rican, etc. I just wanted to cover a little bit about music that comes from Latin America. There's a very diverse genre that many genres that have originated from Latin American countries. And one of my favorites is an artist by the name of Residente. And he comes from Puerto Rico. And a lot of his lyrics deal with injustices and exclusion of Latinos in the US. But he comes from Puerto Rico, so he also deals with social issues that are going on there. And this song that he wrote is called This Is Not America. I'm not going to play the song because it is in Spanish, but I did find an interview where he discusses a little bit about the song, and I thought that would be a useful point to show. And just quickly, he in this interview is going to talk about the problematic nature of assuming that only people in the United States are Americans. So we're going to watch this video quick.
Welcome back. That's a clip from Grammy Award-winning Latin rapper Residente's latest music video, This Is Not America. And that single has been making headlines for its thought-provoking lyrics and the visuals.
And guess who's in the house? He is joining us now to tell us all about it. There he is. Come on in. Welcome, everybody. Welcome.
Thank you very much to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. Look, we talked to so many people who were through the pandemic and so many artists, and they talk about how much work they got done, and a lot of people wrote books and all kinds of things. You were writing but not releasing. Why didn't you want to release music during the pandemic?
I don't know. I didn't feel like releasing anything. I used that time just to write. It was like my process, and then I started to write about everything that was affecting me at the time. And this song I wrote it like 2 years ago.
Wow.
Or yeah, almost 3 years ago.
Oh,
and
wow.
that's why, and for me it was important to send the message of America being the whole continent instead of only one country. And I know that it's kind of like a misconception, and maybe, I don't know if it's education, but every time that someone refers as US as America, I get like, yeah, you know, how about the rest of the continent? So I did this song just to show all of the other things that we have and that we passed through during our history.
So you talk about the world and music from other parts of the world, but you also have an incredibly fascinating process that you use to make some of your music, where you actually went to
study other people's heads, and then I call on and I started to use brainwaves of all of the keys of a piano. The harmonies in this song, This Is Not America. So,
your music all has a message. You're very vocal, you speak up about social injustices, and you incorporate that into your art. Talk a little bit about the power of music and what you hope to achieve by making your lyrics actually mean something, potentially even to invoke change.
Well, for me it's important to express everything with honesty and without fear, and in this particular song I would like to start like a dialogue about whether we should stop using or referring to US by using the term America. And now that we're changing words and modifying and educating the baby boomers, maybe, you know, on how to talk, maybe we can start, and this is a good start, you know. So maybe, or this is Good Morning America, maybe it could be Good Morning USA, or you can start talking
He's
about.
changing the name of our show. I love it.
Yeah. So if you need a creative director, I can help out. Or you can start talking about the whole continent. But but for me, it's important because I don't want to feel excluded. For me, it's about being included.
Residente, thank you very much for being here. We love having you here. And This Is Not America, I want to tell everyone, is available where music is sold and streamed.
Yeah, I think that's a valuable perspective to have. Yeah, now I'm going to move on to talking about the values and norms of Latino culture. I'm not going to make any assumptions about the entire group of Latin Americans, because I just think that it's too broad of a group to try to cover in just a few bullet points. So because I'm fairly familiar with the Mexican culture and value system, I'll cover them. Mexican culture generally places a high value on family, which, as many people know, oftentimes the father or one of the family members of a family living in Mexico, one of the family members will oftentimes migrate to the United States and then send money back to their family. This is a very difficult decision to make because of such a high value that Mexican culture places on family. So that's something to keep in mind. Mexican culture generally follows traditional gender norms, where the woman oftentimes is the housekeeper, takes care of the home and raises the children, while the man generally will go out and work. And finally, Mexican culture is generally collectivistic, which means that they value the group, the community, or the family more than themselves individually. So very different from the United States in that way. Moving on to human rights and social justice issues. The man pictured on the right here is Cesar Chavez. He was a social activist who led successful nonviolent protests in California for migrant farm workers who were being discriminated against and continue to be discriminated against to this day. Chavez led a march of over 1,500 migrant workers from Delano, California to the Capitol in Sacramento. That was in 1966. And it took 25 days of this group of people were marching from town to town to invite migrant workers to join their march. And then they marched to the Capitol in Sacramento and demanded for more equal rights and equal pay. Cesar Chavez unionized the migrant farm workers throughout the United States, and he also did a lot of other social justice work, such as starting boycotts of especially the grapes in California until the wages were raised for migrant workers. And his foundation continues to fight for justice and equal pay for migrant workers in especially California, but all over the United States. Another issue that Latinos face is the lethal nature of the southern U.S. border. Since the presidency of Bill Clinton, there has been much stricter border policy and border patrol agents. So it's much more difficult to get from the southern border into the United States at the ports that used to be very common, such as El Paso, Texas, and San Diego, California. Now, immigrants who are desperate and really need to find work, So they're kind of pushed into the United States, but oftentimes they have to do so in dangerous ways, such as walking for hundreds of miles in the Arizona deserts, or trying to cross the Rio Grande in very treacherous parts. So there are hundreds and hundreds of immigrants that die each year trying to cross the southern border. And the problem has gotten significantly worse, like I said, since Bill Clinton changed the policies of the U.S. border. Another thing that Latinos face is oftentimes they suffer discrimination based on the politically polarized immigration. Just the idea that all people with brown skin or all Latinos, they must be immigrants. And there's just kind of a negative connotation about the term of immigrants in the United States in recent years. So they suffer discrimination based on that. And historically, Latino and Latino workers are paid less than white people. In the height of the pandemic, Latino workers were making 49 cents to every dollar a white man was making. And during the pandemic, many Latino and Latino workers lost their jobs. They're much more at risk of losing their jobs comparatively to white and Caucasian populations. Just a few strategies that can be used for advocacy for the group of Latin Americans. The idea of heterogeneity, which I've kind of already explained a little bit, but the term means to take away the assumption that everyone from a given group has the same cultural values. It's basically seeing each individual as just that, an individual, not assuming that they, just because they're from Mexico, they ascribe to XYZ values. Just assuming that each person is unique and has their own values, regardless of whether they come from a certain group such as Latinos or Hispanics. The idea of transmigration is important for advocacy because the act of moving from a culture that you've lived your whole life, such as Mexico or Colombia or Ecuador, and moving into a new culture offers a lot of difficulties. And that kind of relates to the third term, acculturation. Just kind of moving into the culture of the United States is very difficult. There's a lot of things that someone like me doesn't realize about United States culture, that it's hard to become accustomed to that. And just having empathy for those that are moving into the United States for those reasons. Due to a lot of Latin American countries having a collectivistic type culture, community building is very important for a lot of Latinos. Having a community where they feel like they have support from their neighbors and from local governments is very important for many Latinos to have that community. And more strategies could be pushing for equal education for Latino and Latina students. Historically, the numbers of Latino and Latina students that graduate high school are much lower than white Caucasian populations. And finally, just pushing for more legislation that is friendly towards Spanish speakers. Just to talk a little bit more about the gender and the age norms. These are the two. This one and the next slide are my two topics that I'm adding on to my presentation. Gender norms are generally more traditional in Latino cultures. Women usually do household duties while men go out to work. These norms are also translated into the work that Latino men and women do most often. Latino women often do hospitality and cleaning occupations compared to Latino men who more often do the blue collar work such as construction and field work. In Latin American countries, the elderly are more likely to be highly respected. This means that Latino parents will often live with their children when they get older. And it's pretty rare for elderly Latinos to be sent to elderly care centers, which is fairly common in white Caucasian culture in the United States. Finally, just to talk a little bit about the micro and macro practices, social work practice that could be used with, done with Latinos. First, to start off, talking about micro level practice, English tutoring is one example. I am currently volunteering for CRIC. It's the Cash Refugee and Immigrant Connection. And I help immigrants who have moved to Logan and are trying to get their driver's license. And another way that, something that CRIC does is they help immigrants obtain social services and have access to community resources, and just having like a connection to all of those resources and a place where they can go that they can kind of begin to be more accustomed with the United States culture is very valuable. And then some ways that social workers can work at the macro level would be for advocating for legislation that is more accepting of immigrant populations and that provides them with more opportunities to work, that gives them an easier path to getting their driver's license, an easier path to accessing social services and education and English tutoring. All those things are very important for this population. Pushing for equal pay for Latino and Latino workers. That's more of a social activism type of practice. And finally, social activism, pushing against the discrimination of Latino populations in schools, workplaces, and our communities. And that's my bibliography, and that's my presentation. Thank you.